respected Director General of IIIDEM, Shri Rakesh Kumar Verma ji, my dear colleagues, faculty members, research associates, thematic leaders, and thematic teams from states and union territories, a very good morning to all of you. I would like to begin with a statement that methodology is generally seen as the prelude before the real work begins. And operationally, it is treated as the most technical part of any research. But if we look closely, if we look deeply, we realize that methodology is not the most technical part. It is the most democratic part because it allows other researchers to see how we have reached our conclusions. It allows other researchers to replicate our methods and to refine, to revise, and also to reject and challenge what we have found. In 1936, the Literary Digest, a weekly US magazine, published the predictions of presidential elections between Democrat Franklin D. Roosevelt and a Republican challenger Alf Landon. They surveyed over 2 million voters. 2 million. The largest survey ever in the history at that point in time. And they predicted a landslide for Alf Landon. Their sample was enormous. Their prediction was confident. And yet, they were proved spectacularly wrong. Roosevelt won in one of the largest landslides in American history. This textbook case of sampling failure gave birth to the concept of voluntary non-response bias. Voluntary non-response bias occurs when a large proportion of your sample simply refuses to respond. And that refusal is not random because one specific group may be more motivated to respond in comparison to the other group. For example, in this particular case, Alf Landon's supporters were an angry and energized minority who wanted Roosevelt to be defeated. And they were far more motivated to respond and to return their ballots. In comparison to Roosevelt's supporters who felt little or no urgency to respond. The failure to account for differential motivation introduced the systemic error. However, researchers were able to identify differential motivation, lack of factoring in of the differential motivation factor as the real culprit only because methodology was clear and transparent. So even in its failure, this study made a contribution to the science of sampling, precisely because its methodology, even if it was flawed, was at least transparent. As thematic groups, we will be preparing several reports based on extensive data collection, extensive research. India currently holds the chairship of International IDEA, and IIIDEM is working across several themes related to democracy and election management. Every single theme comes with oceans of literature, reports, case laws, policy papers, and experiences from hundreds of countries. Without method, a researcher will drown in the sea of information, and the output will remain mere accumulation of facts. But with method, research becomes knowledge, which can be tested by other researchers and which can be applied by the policymakers. With method, we can ask what problem did this particular policy actually solve? Which legal, administrative, or institutional conditions allowed this policy, that particular policy, to deliver its intended benefits? Methodology, therefore, is not information accumulation, it is about knowledge creation. Knowledge which is objective, which is unbiased, which is portable, and which is transferable. So, this is the first reason why methodology matters. Secondly, without a clear methodology, researchers are vulnerable to confirmation bias, which is an important and yet, from research point of view, a scary concept in cognitive science. Confirmation bias is the tendency to notice evidence that confirms what we already believe, and to set aside and to not notice and to ignore the evidence that challenges what we already expect to find. That is why our methodology insists on triangulation, cross-checking across EMB records, observer reports, academic assessments, and practitioner testimony. This is why we insist on documentary analysis, comparative cases, stakeholder consultations, screening matrices, and peer review. So, methodology protects us from our own subjectivity, from our own biases. And in other words, methodology is the antidote to confirmation bias. Thirdly, methodology creates comparability because it allows us to ask by what criteria a particular case is being selected, by what evidence a particular case is being evaluated, and under what conditions the lessons from our comparative study can be adopted and adapted to different settings. Without methodology, we cannot compare. Without comparison, we cannot understand. And without understanding, we cannot create knowledge, we cannot create institutional knowledge. Fourth and finally, methodology matters because it protects the credibility of the institution that prepares those reports, and it also protects the credibility of the researcher who has, or the group of researchers who have undertaken that research work. International IDEA speaks of credibility gap, the gap that institutions must fill consistently. They must work toward it continuously and consistently. In the domain of research, this gap is not closed by eloquence. This is closed by a transparent and sound methodology, which allows an institution, which allows a researcher or a group of researchers to stand fully behind the work they have produced, to invite scrutiny rather than to prevent or evade scrutiny. So let me bring this together. Methodology is not just the prelude to the real work, methodology is the real work. Today we will discuss scoping, literature review, and case identification. Then tomorrow, stakeholder engagement, comparative synthesis, documentation, and peer review. And then data sources, referencing AI tools, peer learning, and publication roadmap. Finally, let me close by saying that the Election Commission of India is among the most respected electoral institutions in the world. The Election Commission of India has entrusted us to contribute to IIIDEM's research and intellectual output, and we hope to honor that trust by using sound methodology in our reports. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable thoughts and guidance. We also have ocean of knowledge at IIIDEM in the form of you. It is now my privilege to invite Director General IIIDEM, Mr. Rakesh Verma, sir, to deliver the opening address. Please, sir.